Good morning. Welcome to Inquisition Update. I've got an echo. There we go. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Inquisition Update. My name's Tom Fress, and I'll be your host for the next hour. You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.net. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. Still in the introductory portion of this book entitled Footprints of the Jesuits by R.W. Thompson. Remember, we were talking about the period of time when Italy was being liberated from the tyrannical yoke of the papacy during the establishment of an independently elected public government, a popular government of, by, and for the people under Victor Emmanuel, and the uprising that the papacy launched against the people of Italy for having thrown off his yoke of control. He launched a global uprising against the Italian Roman Catholics. And he even used American Roman Catholics, those who live in a nation where the church and the state are separated, where the state serves the people and not the Pope. And here they are, the American Roman Catholics, up in arms, castigating the Italian Roman Catholic people for having supported what the Pope must have seen at that time, a de facto government, a rebellious government, a government that rebelled against his temporal authority. And the question immediately rising in one's mind is, if these American Roman Catholics feel this way about Italian Roman Catholics who overthrew the temporal power of the Pope in favor of a popular government, much like ours here in the United States of America, what are their true feelings about the government of the United States of America, the popular, or even more correctly, the Protestant government of America? Without realizing it, the American Roman Catholics in this country played their hand about what they really believe about an independent government, about a popular form of government, about a Republican form of government. They despise it. And their preference is for papal tyranny. That the Pope is not just a priest or the leader of the Roman Catholic Church. He's also the King of Kings. And they thought that it was an outrage that the Italian Roman Catholic people relegated the Pope from that position of imperialism, from that position of governmental authority that stripped him of his temporal power and put him in his place in the Vatican to be a priest, and elected Victor Emmanuel to be their king. Now, this is a very important happenstance in world history. When the Italian government was overthrown when the papal throne was overthrown by Victor Emmanuel, the form of government changed to a popular government. The Catholics of the world were in uprising, particularly the United States of America. It says the Pope himself, when he realized that he was about to lose his crown, that is, his temporal crown or his kingly crown over Italy, talked about the 200 million Roman Catholics scattered throughout the world who were to be excited to this conflict with the Italian people. And the Jesuits consider themselves especially assigned to the duty of amassing the forces of this great papal army and directing its movements. So here we have the world's Roman Catholics, and most specifically the American Roman Catholics, outraged at the Italian people And also, not only the Catholics of this country, but the Jesuits went into action as the commanders of this Roman Catholic force, this global Roman Catholic army that was to rise up against the Italian people. He says, in that capacity, and we're talking about the Jesuits here, in that capacity and with that secret purpose, they have distributed themselves throughout the populous parts of the United States, crowding into our cities and employing their tireless energies in the work of educating a considerable portion of our people, both young and old, in the religious belief that it is their Christian duty to snatch the crown from the head of the constitutional king of Italy, that is Victor Emmanuel, where those of their own religious faith, Roman Catholics in Italy, have placed it, and restore it to the Pope, from whose head they removed it by employing the same sovereign power which the people of the United States invoked when they laid the foundation for their institutions. So, there you have it. They were going to use their religious liberty in this country to place the Italian Roman Catholics back under papal tyranny. Never mind that the Italian Roman Catholics threw off the papal yoke. The American Roman Catholics were going to put that temporal power back on the Pope's head. And it's a startling chain of events. And the author says it is a serious thing, too serious to be disregarded, to know that under the protection of the liberalism of our laws, freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of religion, freedom of conscience, freedom, that the Roman Catholics would use that freedom to bind the Italian Roman Catholics under papal tyranny. That's what R.W. Thompson's telling us. What does that tell us about the American Roman Catholics at that time? It tells us plainly that they are opposed to our form of government. That if given a choice, the American Roman Catholics would prefer not a government of, by, and for the people, but a government of, by, and for the Pope. That the American Roman Catholics of this country would return us back to the old world order, where church and state were united, where the Pope was the ultimate authority in the world, and the kings did his bidding, and the people were serfs, ruled over in every thought, word, and deed. That's what this author's telling us. That if given a choice, the American Roman Catholics would return us to the old world order. And that's precisely what they're doing today. It was a fear in the days of R.W. Thompson, but it's a reality in our day. It says it is a serious thing, too serious to be disregarded, to know that under protection of the liberalism of our laws, there are scattered among our people those who are striving to entangle us in alliances which have no other end than to disturb the quiet of the nation and endanger the public welfare. The sacrifices made by the American people in behalf of the right of self-government entitle them to be left to themselves to the undisturbed enjoyment of that right. They have shown themselves wise enough to understand the causes which led to the decay of former nations and discreet enough to avoid them. What's he talking about? The union of church and state. The American people were very, very careful, understanding what ailed Europe during the old world order, not to let it recreate itself here in the new world. They took special precautions to stop the entanglements of our government with any other foreign power, but most especially any entanglements with the papacy. Cognizant of the desperate problems that the old world order posed for God's people, they were very careful never to let that happen again in this country. He says they have shown themselves wise enough to understand the causes which led to the decay of former nations, the decay of the old world order, you might say, and discreet enough to avoid them. Discreet enough to avoid a recreation of the old world order. Now, among these causes, the union of church and state has always been conspicuously prominent. What is always consistent throughout history, at the very root and cause of all the problems of the old world order, it was the union of church and state, where the Roman Catholic Church had all the power, and the state governments, the kings of Europe, did what the papacy said to do. And it was always tyranny for the people. Ignorance, superstition, and tyranny. He says, among these causes, the union of church and state has always been conspicuously prominent. Wherefore they found it necessary to put an end to this union by leaving the church independent in the spiritual and the state equally so in the temporal sphere. This separation constitutes a great and important political fact, wholly distinct from any of the forms and principles of religious belief, and practically embodies the American idea, perpetuated in Protestantism, that the right to perfect and untrammeled freedom of conscience is not derived from concession from either spiritual or temporal monarchs, but from the inalienable laws of nature. In view of the past experience of mankind, it seemed clear to them that the best form of government is that which guarantees this natural right to each individual, to be enjoyed as a political right without any restraint whatsoever. In no other way can free popular government ever become possible. They believed also that mankind had been held long enough in inferiority and bondage by the combined influence of church and state despotism, and that inasmuch as they had been providentially placed in possession of a new and undeveloped continent, it was not only wise, but best for them and their posterity that in establishing their government, they should make the further union of church and state impossible unless some alien power should be strong enough to overthrow their institutions, or they should fall into decay by means of corruptions engendered by this fatal union as other governments had fallen. Anytime there is a union of church and state, a nation is about to fall. Any independent nation with a government of, by, and for the people, when it unites with the church, that is the Roman Catholic Church, that independence and freedom falls. Now, it was an experiment hitherto unsuccessful, and was consequently observed by multitudes throughout the world with intense solicitude. If there were any who considered the experiment injudicious, and likewise to prove a failure, but little time elapsed before their doubts were dissipated by the results accomplished, results which all who are rightfully entitled to American citizenship now accept as a precious inheritance from the founders of our republic. Our institutions are no longer an experiment. They have become actual and accomplished reality. And it is not now the time for us to think about turning back to the bondage of monarchism. And we should indicate the desire to do, as we should indicate the desire to do by denying to the people of Italy the right to imitate our example of separating church and state and governing themselves by the laws of their own making. They who invite us to this are counselors of error. R.W. Thompson clearly saying that if there's any voice in the United States of America that is encouraging Americans to participate in this war against the Italian people for overthrowing the temporal power of the Pope, they are counselors of error. R.W. Thompson championed the separation, the permanent and complete separation between church and state. Listen, I may have many listeners who are saying to themselves, now look, in a perfect society there would be a union of church and state where our laws would reflect our faith. And there are others who would say rightly, even rightly so, that when Christ establishes his kingdom and rules and reigns with a rod of iron, won't there be a union of church and state? Will there be any religious liberty in God's heavenly kingdom? No. But there's one critical difference, and that is the governments of the world are still made up of sinful, wicked, and ambitious men, and led by the most sinful, wicked, and ambitious man on the planet, the one who presumptuously calls himself the replacement of Christ on earth. That's the Pope of Rome. And until all human government is brought down and replaced with a government of Christ, never should the people of this world acquiesce to a union of church and state, because when you acquiesce to church over state, you have acquiesced to the man of sin over state. You don't need me or anybody else to tell you how corrupt Washington, D.C. is. And if you're paying any attention at all, you don't need me or anybody else to tell you how corrupt the hierarchy of the Roman Catholic Church is. All the Vatican, just the most popular subject, the continual stories of corruption of the Vatican Bank, the continual stories of papal pedophilia and sodomy within the Roman Catholic Church, the outrageous changing of God's law, the outrageous changing of doctrine, the outrageous corruption of the meanings of the prophecies of God's book. What hope do you think there would ever be for mankind for a union of those two most corrupt institutions, church and state? I hope I've made my point. To separate church from the state is not to separate Christ from his people. We are the vessels of the Holy Spirit. The church goes wherever we go. We are ruled from the inside out by the power of Christ and by his word and by the leading and teaching of the Holy Spirit. But let us not be confused about that reality and this counterfeit in the world called the papacy. Now, the Italian people were simply following the example of the United States of America, where there is a separation between church and state, where the people are free to worship as their conscience dictates. And they were sick and tired of papal tyranny. They wanted to be liberated from the Pope. Victor Emmanuel liberated them. Why wouldn't the Catholics of the United States be cheering on the Italians? If they loved our form of government, why wouldn't they congratulate the Italians for coming to the same conclusion? R.W. Thompson's plain and telling us that the Catholics in this country want to return to papal tyranny, and they think Italy ought to come back under papal tyranny too. R.W. Thompson said clearly, if anyone in this country counsels for a union of church and state, he is counseling for evil. He's an evil counselor. One who is obviously ignorant of history, and that's why we're reading this book here on Inquisition Update. He continues, he says that the Jesuits are not content with the separation of church and state is a fact too palpable for contradiction. Hence the readiness with which they engage in their organization in this country of a political religious party pledged to restore the Pope's temporal power. Notwithstanding, such a party is condemned by the spirit of our institutions and is regarded by the general public as impolitic, inexpedient, and hazardous. And inasmuch as they have chosen to thrust this issue upon us, we are not permitted to become indifferent to it or to shrink from our responsibility of citizenship under a government entitled to our patriotic allegiance. Listen, my patriotism is well exercised if I champion the separation of church and state. Anytime I exercise any form of acquiescence to a union of church and state, I cease to be a patriot for this country. That's what R.W. Thompson is saying here. He says such an issue cannot be evaded and must be met with fearlessness and becoming candor. If one is informed that a poisonous viper is coiled up under a pillow upon which he is about to lay his head, he will instinctively strive after the means necessary to escape its fangs. So, when apprised that cunning and adroit adversaries like the Jesuits are plotting against cherished and vital principles of our institutions, our Protestant institutions, the separation of church and state, the obligation to make ourselves familiar with their principles, that is, the principles of the Jesuits, their policy and their history, becomes imperative. Did you hear what R.W. Thompson just said? He said these are the counselors of evil, these Jesuits, who teach, not only in this country but around the world, that there's only one good form of government, and that is a union of church and state where the church rules supreme over the state and the people are just vassals. When they preach this stuff, it becomes imperative for us to learn of their policies, their principles, and their history. And that's what the remainder of this book is about. The principles, policies, and the history of these counselors of evil, these Jesuit priests, who have successfully converted this country not from a republic to a papal tyranny. We'll be back right after these messages. You're listening to Inquisition Update on FirstAmendmentRadio.com.
Years ahead of the dominant media, FirstAmendmentRadio.com and FirstAmendmentRadio.net.
I know you all want answers, and believe me, so do I, and I'll do my best to get them.
Have you seen the Left Behind movies? Have you read the Left Behind fictional book series? Not everyone believes Left Behind is true prophecy. Some may even regard as conspiratorial the mainstream re-release of the Left Behind movie with actor Nicolas Cage portraying the main character as an attempt to further reinforce in the minds of all this perception of false prophecy in order to condition the masses for the play about to begin. Because they see the world stage shaping to fulfill what they have been led to believe is sound biblical interpretation, a Left Behind rapture scenario, this false view of prophecy is reinforced in the mind, not only of its adherents, but also includes those who have been merely exposed to the specific media. Is it possible that false prophecy can be fulfilled? The rapture theories have always been in dispute. Pre-trib, mid-trib, and post-trib disputes have risen up in exclusively evangelical circles of recent history, so that when true believers don't suddenly disappear, this element will easily go by the wayside when all see a new Jewish temple begin to be built. Will this be part of the great delusion that will come upon the whole earth? It seems that this great prophetic delusion has already overcome practically the entire American evangelical and Christian world. Get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. To learn more, visit crosstheborder.org. That's CROSS, crosstheborder.org.
Record budget deficits, bankruptcies galore, and the U.S. dollar is at an all-time low. With today's gloomy economic outlook, safe investments are often hard to find. For over a decade, Melody Cedarstrom at Discount Gold and Silver Trading Company has been helping people secure their future by investing in the precious metals. Melody has the honesty, integrity, and experience that is often lacking in the precious metals business. Let her put it to work for you. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 800-375-4188. That's 800-375-4188.
Welcome back from the break. You're listening to the second half hour of Inquisition Update on FirstAmendmentRadio.com. If you like Inquisition Update, please support First Amendment Radio, who sponsors the program. We're listener-supported for obvious reasons, and we need for you to prayerfully do your part so that we can continue this ministry. R.W. Thompson said before the break, so, when apprised that cunning and adroit adversaries like the Jesuits are plotting against cherished and vital principles of our institution, the obligation to make ourselves familiar with their principles, policy, and history becomes imperative. R.W. Thompson said it was imperative that Americans, all Americans, Roman Catholic Americans as well as Protestant Americans, all Americans, become familiar with the principles, policy, and history of the Jesuit order. And he said, being forewarned, we shall have no excuse for not being forearmed. R.W. Thompson viewed the Jesuit order as the most dangerous threat to our Protestant constitutional republic. And he was absolutely correct, as history now shows. He continues, he says, we must do nothing, either now or hereafter, forbidden by our national character, or by the liberalism we prize so highly. Our Constitution amply protects the rights of free speech, free thought, and a free press, all of which must be held inviolable. But violence is manifestly done to the spirit of patriotism, which guarantees this protection, when it is demanded of any portion of our population that they shall participate in the work of undoing, in any degree whatsoever, what the founders of the government considered fundamental. Okay? You start attacking the fundamental principles of our republic, the whole republic becomes vulnerable. You start chewing away at freedom of speech, freedom of thought, and freedom of the press, you're chewing away at the very foundation of this republic. And especially if you begin to speak favorably of a union of church and state in this country, you have attacked the cornerstone of the foundation of this republic. He says, we are prohibited from submitting to anything that shall tend, even by possibility, to subject the people to any sovereignty, either spiritual or temporal, higher than themselves, in such matters as involve their own happiness and welfare. Okay? R.W. Thompson is preaching that you are the ultimate authority in this country. And you do yourself and your republic a disservice if you leave room for any other foreign power. He's speaking of the Pope, either in temporal sphere or spiritual sphere. He says it would be well, consequently, for those who are seeking to accomplish this, to learn that the world is large enough for them and us, that there are other fields within better grounds of hope are furnishing for rewelding the fragments of shattered monarchies. In other words, there's a power in this world that would love to establish the old monarchical system, the papacy ruling over the kings of the earth, the church-state union, the old world order. He says that there are other fields wherein better grounds of hope are furnished for rewelding the fragments of shattered monarchies, and that when they avail themselves of the tolerance of our institutions to assail their foundations, they become intruders into a peaceful and harmonious circle where, but for them, universal peace and quiet would prevail. He said if it weren't for these people, there'd be universal peace and quiet. But they stir up trouble wherever they go, always striving for a union of church and state in every nation, and finally, the whole world. A global union of church and state. He says in this conflict with the Italian people for the repossession of the temporal power, by overthrowing the constitutional government they have established, the Pope could not find another ally so formidable as the Jesuits, nor one with such implacable hatred of liberalism and popular government. The Jesuits hate our liberal forms of government, our popular government. You see, it's the people who govern. Theoretically, the people govern in this country. Never is that to be so in the Roman Catholic world. It's the church over the state. The Pope and his hierarchy over the politicians. The Roman Catholic Church, in an ideal world for the Pope, the Roman Catholic Church and all of her priests are the shadow government that rides over the beast, the civil power. And the people are no count. They are like tools in a drawer to be drawn out and used as however they see fit, and then when finished, put them back in the drawer or throw them in the junk heap. That's why the people rebelled. When Martin Luther stood up and proclaimed the Pope to be Antichrist, the papacy to be Antichrist, and the Roman Catholic Church to be a synagogue of Satan, everybody left the Roman Catholic Church. The monarchs even rebelled against the papacy. Why would we allow anybody in this country to restore union of church and state? It's insanity. He says, in his conflict with the Italian people for the repossession of the temporal power, by overthrowing the constitutional government they have established, the Pope could not find another ally so formidable as the Jesuits, nor one with such implacable hatred of liberalism and popular government. R.W. Thompson, in his genius, forgot to mention here, in this most critical place, Protestantism. Because that's where we get it all. That's where all the institutions of the United States come from. It's Protestant roots. He says their society, the Jesuits, their society is so united and compact that its ranks cannot be broken. They are everywhere the same, moved by a common impulse under the direction and dictation of their general in Rome, the Jesuit general. They are the deadly enemies of civil and religious liberty. Nothing that stands in their way can become so sacred as to escape their vengeance. Protestantism has borne no fruits to which they have been reconciled. They consider the Protestant Reformation, which gave birth to it, to have been criminal resistance against the only rightful authority upon the earth, the papacy, that which proceeds from church and state combined. They believe, the Jesuits believe, that the condition of mankind during the Middle Ages, during the Dark Ages, staggering under the weight of feudal oppression, was preferable to modern progress and enlightenment. That human happiness would be promoted by the return to that period, the Dark Ages, the Middle Ages, a union of church and state, papal supremacy. The Pope, they want to restore the world to the time when the Pope was King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Look, if there's anything we have learned from history, we have to learn that a union of church and state is the death knell of any nation. That human happiness would be promoted by the return to that period. That the political right of self-government by the people cannot be set up against the higher right of papal and monarchical power. Papal and monarchical power. That's church and state power. That the progress of the advancing nations is delusive and unsubstantial, and that institutions which guarantee civil and religious freedom, if not arrested by some coercive power strong enough to put an end to them, will lead, through heresy, to social ruin and desolation. If at the period of the Protestant Reformation this society had not been established for the express purpose of counteracting its influence, a knowledge of the difference between primitive Christianity and the prevailing dogmas might have led to such reforms as would have reconciled Christians to dwell together in peace and concord. But when a dove should have been set forth bearing the olive branch of Christian charity, this society, the Jesuit order, sprang from the brain of a disappointed military adventurer, Ignatius Loyola, and began at once to scatter the seeds of strife and discord. Now here again is another example where R.W. Thompson, as charitable as he is, resists any temptation to call the Pope the Antichrist or the Roman Catholic Church to be the synagogue of Satan, as did the Protestant reformers. For he wants this book to appeal to Roman Catholics, so he's protecting their hearts, because he knows they're Roman Catholics. They love the Pope and they love the Church. But the message is clear in this book. Roman Catholicism is not, by any stretch of the imagination, Christianity. Now, while we can live in peace with Roman Catholics so long as they give us the liberty to worship God according to the Scriptures and the leading and teaching of the Holy Spirit, in other words, adopt a position of live and let live, then all is well. But the moment the Roman Catholic Church gets in control, she takes away religious liberty and insists that everybody become Catholic and a slave to the Pope. It's not Christianity. And Protestants need to quit calling the Roman Catholic Church a Christian church. The Roman Catholic Church is the synagogue of Satan, just like the Protestant reformers said. The papacy is the office of Antichrist. Now, he says, almost from the beginning it has been a distributor of the peace of nations. Almost from the beginning it has been a disturber of the peace of nations, suffering only such as has bestowed patronage upon it to establish its maledictions and its plottings. That's right. The only way to have peace with the Jesuits is to acquiesce to their maledictions and plottings, to assist them in whatever they're doing. in raising up discord among the nations. That's the only way to have peace with the Jesuit order, is to acquiesce. And if you get out of a position of acquiescence to the Jesuit order, you become their chief enemy. He says the members of this society, the Jesuit order, are numerous and powerful in the United States. They are constantly increasing, mainly by accessions from their drilled and disciplined companions in Europe, but also by conversions of unsuspecting young men who are seduced by their vain and supercilious pretensions as educators. Okay? Stop and think about it. All throughout Europe, the Jesuits were suppressed by a papal bull. They were enemy number one in Europe. They had disturbed the peace of the nations all over Europe. It was known of them that they were disturbers of the public peace. And both government and people alike were opposed to the Jesuits. Even the papacy was opposed to the Jesuits and suppressed them by a papal bull. But they found refuge here in the United States, and they were encouraged by their clandestine Jesuit brothers in Europe. And not only did they operate without even criticism in this country, except for a few people like R.W. Thompson and Justin Dewey Fulton and some of the others that we've read here on Inquisition Update, but they were free to recruit students for their prestigious universities. And it was through these universities right here on terra firma USA, Protestant USA, the Jesuits were recruiting to build their army in America for the eventual overthrow of our government. And as we've said so many times here on Inquisition Update, those are the most prestigious universities in this country. The brightest minds seek entrance into a Jesuit university to improve their chances for success in life. And the Jesuits are delighted that the brightest minds are attracted to their university and that they can more adroitly understand and implement Jesuitry, Jesuit influence in their occupations, no matter what they are, the professions in this country, and most particularly in politics. Okay? The Jesuits are constantly increasing, mainly by accessions from their drilled and disciplined companions in Europe, but also by conversions of unsuspecting young men who are seduced by their vain and supercilious pretensions as educators. They are, as they have always been, selfish and vindictive, restless under opposition, and compromising in nothing. They have neither country, nor homes, nor families, nor friendships beyond the limits of their order. A Jesuit is devoid of all earthly ties. Okay? The only tie that a Jesuit has is his order and his superior general, the Jesuit general. They are devoid of any loyalties other than to their company and to their Jesuit general. They've been stripped of every possession, every tie, every allegiance, every nation, and they've even surrendered their own will and intellect to their Jesuit general. I mean, have you ever thought of a zombie? A brainless, witless machine that simply and automatically responds to the commands of its owner, its operator? That's what a Jesuit is. They're dead to self, completely dead to self. They don't think or act independently from their order and from their Jesuit general. They're immediate superiors. They're automatons, robots. And the Jesuit general wields each and every individual Jesuit like the stick in the hand of an old man. They are instruments for the eventual conquest of the world by their Jesuit general. And his first and primary purpose is to destroy Protestantism and everything that rose out of the Protestant Reformation, and most particularly Protestant forms of government, constitutional republics, like we have here in the United States and like they tried to get in Italy at the time of the writing of this book. And the Jesuits sprung immediately into action, organizing Catholics all over the world to oppose the Catholic people who insisted on liberating themselves from papal tyranny and forming their own government, just like the one here in the United States. Jesuits have neither country, nor homes, nor families, nor friendships beyond the limits of their order, the Jesuit order. None of the affections of the heart which give charm to life and social intercourse, being required to abandon all these to fit themselves for uninquiring obedience to their general, whose commands, whether right or wrong, good or bad, they have solemnly vowed to execute without the least regard for the consequences. Okay? Let me put it this way. Jesuits are the ultimate Freemasons. Does that tell you anything about Freemasonry? Freemasons aren't to think, do, or say anything independent of what their worshipful master tells them to do. And you'll find this characteristic in every secret society over which the Jesuits control. Every secret society formed under Jesuit authority is a mirror image of the Jesuit order that founded them. Freemasonry is one of the most powerful secret societies formed under the Jesuit order, and they operate just like the Jesuits. All their allegiance belongs to their commander. It says, being required to abandon all these and fit themselves for uninquiring obedience to their general, whose commands, whether right or wrong, good or bad, they have solemnly vowed to execute without the least regard for the consequences. Having persistently refused to become reconciled to the forms and methods of Christian civilization which prevail among our Protestant population, they employ all the resources they can command in endeavoring to arrest them, to stop them. They insist that church and state shall be united wheresoever they are separate, and that the basis of such union shall be the subordination of the state to the church. Okay? Not only shall there be a union of church and state, but the state shall be subservient to the church. And who is the church but the Pope? That's a global government for the Pope. That's the New World Order. It's simply the reformation of the Old World Order. He says, self-government by the people is held by the Jesuits to be violative of the divine law, and on that account might rightfully be resisted as heretical when its overthrow can be assured. So they're going to rise up against us Republicans as heretics whenever they are sure of success of overthrowing us. Now, what does it tell about heretics in the Council of Trent? It's not only not a sin, but it's a meritorious work to kill a heretic. So if you're doing the math, here it is. Anybody who resists this Pope's New World Order is a heretic and may be dispensed with at the earliest opportunity by whatever means are available. And you'll be rewarded by the church, by the Roman Catholic Church. Now, what position does this put the ecumenical evangelibellies who are not worthy of the name of Protestant, who believe that the Pope is not the Antichrist, the papacy is not the Antichrist, but some slick-looking dude that looks a lot like Mitt Romney that's not going to appear on the world scene until the last 7 years before Jesus Christ returns, and believe that the Pope is the leader of the Christian world. What position are these ecumenical evangelibellies going to occupy when they unite church and state in this country? And America truly becomes a quote-unquote Christian country. What position are they going to occupy? I tell you, if truth and good sense do not soon prevail among the ecumenical evangelibellies, they'll be the ones pulling the chain on the guillotines of God's holy people in this country. The Pope will make them executioners of God's people, promising them rewards from the Church of Jesus Christ, the Roman Catholic Church, never realizing that it is, was, and always will be the synagogue of Satan. What a travesty is about to happen here in once Protestant USA. I'll see you tomorrow.
Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
I know you all want answers, and believe me, so do I, and I'll do my best to get them.
Despite Nicolas Cage's promise to do his best to get left behind rapture answers for us, don't hold your breath. Not everyone believes Left Behind is true prophecy. Some may even regard as conspiratorial the mainstream re-release of the Left Behind movie, with actor Nicolas Cage portraying the main character, as an attempt to further reinforce in the minds of all this perception of false prophecy, in order to condition the masses for the play about to begin. If you want true Bible prophecy answers, get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. The author exposes the Latin rapture origin, the 7-year tribulation deception, true Bible revelation of Daniel's 70 weeks, the abomination of desolation, the restrainer, America in the Revelation, the image of the beast and the mark of the beast, and the truth about God's chosen people, and so much more about Bible prophecy. This book will shatter the Left Behind paradigm of future events. Get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.